Books. Now, I wouldn't claim to have the best literary taste there is, but I do think that reading is for education and enjoyment, so a mixture of that is in my taste. And with that being said, here are my top 15 books that I really, really love. 15. So in 15, I have Percy Jackson, which is pretty much everyone's favorite nostalgic book series. But mine as a kid was Harry Potter, which didn't age very well for me. So I picked this up around 10th grade, and it really brings me a lot of comfort now to have a series that I can read and not feel like, oh yeah, this author would want me dead. This book is about a 12-year-old boy who finds out that, surprise, he's part god, and kind of the adventures he goes on from there, the people he meets, and the enemies he fights. Very fun. Number 14 is Becoming Who We Are. I got this book while I was on a trip, and I remember being in this new bookstore and seeing it on display and thinking it looked cool. This book made me cry. It was happy tears, but it did make me cry. It's the story of many different trans people growing up and discovering their identities and then kind of becoming themselves, and it is very, very sweet. The art is beautiful, the writing is wonderful. It has a very, very special place in my heart. Number 13 is The Spirit Bears Its Teeth. Just to take a moment and judge a book by its cover. I really love this book sleeve, and it is actually illustrated by Evangeline Gallagher. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right. Which, shout out to them, because this is very beautiful, but this book is more than just a pretty cover. Andrew Joseph White crafted such an interesting historical fiction that having a queer character, which is not something you often see, because a lot of the time historical fiction is about straight white people, and that's just not all of history. Now this one's gonna be a little bit nerdy. Romeo and Juliet by the man himself. When I was in 6th grade, I got in trouble, and my dad was like, you go read Romeo and Juliet. Why I had to read something as my punishment, I don't really remember. That's very weird. I had to read it, and I did not want to. So I looked up the plot and then the twist at the end, which I won't spoil in case you haven't read the play. And I texted him. I was like, oh my god, that happened? Because I just read a review for 5 seconds, and I was like, oh, that happened, okay. But upon reading it in 9th grade, I found out it is really, really good. Shocker, it's a famous play. I don't know why I thought it wouldn't be good. It follows the story of, shockingly, Romeo and Juliet and their star-crossed lover experience, but what really makes this story shine for me was all of the personality side characters, my favorite being Mercutio, and I just found it to be really fun and entertaining and just an enjoyable read. Also, that was number 12. I don't think I said that. Number 11 is Another Appalachia, coming up queer and Indian in a mountain place, and this follows the story of a queer Asian American woman who, in her experiences living in West Virginia and growing up and moving out of West Virginia and kind of reflecting on the people that she grew up with. If you want to get into memoirs, I'd recommend this because it's not a textbook of information, but it still is very, very well done, and I really enjoyed it. Now, number 10 is a book that I previously claimed to be my favorite, but I had to dock it down a little bit because I haven't read it in a long time. It's been like 2 years, so I didn't want to have my favorite book be one that I don't remember as vividly. So, with that being said, it is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, and this book is spectacular. It is the story of Mary Cat and her sister Constance, and after a tragedy that happens with their family, they're ostracized by the town they live in, and experiences in life that goes on from that. It's very interesting. Number 9 is another book that I think could possibly be my favorite, but it has been a year since I've read it, so I docked it down a little bit, but oh my god, this is not one of the best pieces of literature I've ever read. It is Girl, Woman, Other, and it follows the lives of many Black British women and their experiences, their perspectives, and it really dives into all of these characters while connecting them in such interesting ways. And at the end, you're like, oh my god, I recognize that. It's like a celebrity sighting, seeing another character in another person's story. That is Girl, Woman, Other. Number 9 is a book I feel like I barely need to introduce because everyone knows it, everyone loves it. It's The Hunger Games. I feel like no favorite books list is completed without having this book on it or a piece of this series. This story follows Katniss Everdeen as she lives in what was North America, now called Panem, separated into two parts, the capital and the 12 districts. And it goes in on the differences these two places have, as well as the extreme amounts of cruelty that there is and that exists here, and the things one has to do for survival. What I love about this book is every time you read it, you get a little bit more out of it, and you find another detail that really adds to it. And it's just such a masterclass in writing, for that is The Hunger Games. Number 8 is The Glass Castle, which I have from the library right now because my sister swears she owns it, so every time I go to a used bookstore and I see it, I don't get it, and she's like, Alex, I swear I have it. I have yet to see it, but we have it from the library right now. Memoirs are my favorite genre at the moment, and this book is exactly why. The story follows a quite dysfunctional family. It's just very, very fascinating, and it really helped establish my personal love for memoirs. Somewhere my massive brain got the counting wrong, so can't count to 15, I guess. This is number 6, and it's Giovanni's Room. This is the first book by James Baldwin I've ever read, and it quickly established him as one of my absolute favorite authors because his writing is just it's so beautiful and full of life, and his characters jump off the page. And really, describing this book is so difficult because you just need to read it. And it is quite a short book, so it is such a worthwhile read. It's a story and takes place in Paris and is this love and tragedy that happens between these two men, and it is very, very beautifully written. Number 5 is a book that has a pretty special place in my heart, and that is A Kind of Spark. This follows an autistic girl and her experiences growing up, her fighting to be taken seriously. And I think that's a really important story, especially for young people to read, to show that your voice does matter and you should make it heard. But especially the story mattered to me because I read it the summer I was getting my autism diagnosis, and as it follows an autistic main character, it was the first example of me reading about a character whose brain functioned like-minded. Number 4 on this list is a book that taught me to love poetry and verse novels, and that is The Poet X. This story follows a young woman as she learns about her family, her culture, her religion, and all things in between through meeting new people and trying new things and spreading her voice through poetry. And I think that is so beautiful. It also made me cry many times. I've read this almost every year since like 8th grade, and I think this should be required reading because it is such a lovely and important story. The Poet X. Now this next one, the title, I've heard it said many different ways, so I'm just gonna say it the way I heard the first time. It might be wrong, I don't know, I'm sorry if it is, but that is Piranesi, something like that. I'm gonna be honest, the first time I read it, I didn't love it in the beginning. I was a little bit bored. I was like, what is going on? What are all these titles? Like, come on. But as I continued to read it, I got more and more sucked into this universe or this world. And then by the time I finished it, I immediately read it over again, and I loved every single second of it. It's such a creative and unique work that I feel like I've never read and never will read anything quite like it again. And it follows a character called Piranesi, his life in this labyrinth of sorts of statues and marble and everything, and him learning to care for this place and survive while this person that lives there with him slowly becomes more and more suspicious. So well done, and I love it. Second to last book on this list is one that I kind of procrastinated on reading, not because I didn't think I was going to enjoy it, but because the concept of it didn't sound like something quite up my alley. I've read everything else by this author, so I figured I might as well complete the set, and that is I Was Born with This by Alice Oseman, which, as you can see by its placement on this list, I absolutely adore. It's a dual perspective novel following a character named Jimmy and a character named Angel. One of them is famous and one of them is a fan. Kind of shows how in media fans are dehumanized because they're like, oh, they're crazy fans, but it shows that Angel is more than a crazy fan. She just feels passion, and people ridicule someone that feels passion. And Jimmy is more than just this famous boy. He is a obviously he is a person. I feel like this did a really good job at like showing the love that fandom can have and the connections it can bring us, while also going into how it can be negative at times. Lastly, in the book that I would consider to be my favorite book at the moment is I Who Have Never Known Men. I read this book frantically in 10th grade for a project that I forgot I had, and ended up absolutely loving it. So the frantic reading turned into just reading it fast because I loved it so much. It's kind of hard to describe one without spoiling it, but a group of women are in this cage. They don't know where they are, they don't know how they got there, and it's kind of how they interact with each other and then how things suddenly change and how they move forward from that. It is just such a beautiful book that I love. The writing is phenomenal. It is so wonderful. And that is I Who Have Never Known Men. So those are 15 books that I truly, truly love. If there's any books that you really love that you think I should read, then let me know, and have a wonderful day.